Hello, my name's Dan Harris and I'm the CEO of Neurodiversity in Business. I'm really delighted to welcome today Dr Nancy Doyle from the Centre of Neurodiversity Research at Work at the Birbeck Univesity of London. We're going to hear today some really interesting discussions around the research that she's been leading on universal design principles and how they apply to the corporate world and what we're all trying to see in terms of neurodiversity. Really nice to see you today, Nancy.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Dan, for that lovely introduction. So universal design is an idea that we've borrowed from the wider disability field. And it's the idea that if you create environments, structures and processes that are designed with the most people in mind possible, then we actually reduce disablement because we're creating a much more level playing field. So ideas of universal design have influenced things like step-free access to buildings and the common use of closed captioning on videos. And we can think about universal design in relation to neurodiversity as well. So that's what we're starting to do, and that's what my research is about. What are universal design principles? We know how to do it for people using wheelchairs and people with sensory impairments, but how do you do universal design for somebody who has a cognitive difference or an emotional regulation difference or a sensory sensitivity difference? So that's what universal design really is. But in a business context, it goes a bit deeper than that. So I've worked in this field for 25 years as a coach, as a workplace needs assessor, as a psychologist. I founded a non-profit company called Genius Within. We've provided services in this area for the last 10 years, tens of thousands of clients. And one of the things that I've noticed across the course of my work is that the same problems come up over and over and over again. So although my clients can be quite diverse in terms of some of them are autistic, some of them have ADHD, some are returning to work after a brain injury, the types of things that they find difficult are actually very similar, and there's a lot of commonality. And so given that, it seems very costly the way we do things, because the way we tend to do things is we wait and then they put their hand up and then we say, OK, let's fix that problem just for you, one person at a time, when actually there's some things that we could do and have in place that would mean those problems wouldn't come up in the first place.
I see. And I think that's the timing is great for this, isn't it? Because I see in the corporate world so many big organizations who have focused on neurodiversity, who actually are doing things in a very granular, tactical way, and it's not really kind of data driven or quantified. So I think this research is really well timed.
Lovely. Yeah. And I think, there are different layers of how we go about this. So, at the moment, what a lot of businesses are doing is talks and awareness building and having employee resource groups to kind of generate the awareness of just how neurodiverse their staff team is. People think, we need to hire neurodivergent thinkers, but actually the neurodivergent thinkers are already there. And most employers are already, living in neurodiversity. So those ERGs and talks are really bringing people out and starting conversations. And then some of the more advanced organizations are already doing things like reasonable adjustments at the individual level, like I said, but a few organizations are now starting to think, right, hold on a second. We provided 100 coaching sessions across the whole of the UK last year for our staff. What was going on in those coaching sessions, and how could we prevent that from happening in the first place? So the current cost model for neurodiversity is quite inefficient. We've got what I call a gatekeeping approach. And this is true in schools as well as businesses. The first thing that happens is you get an assessment and a diagnosis, and nothing. It's like none shall pass until you've had this diagnosis and assessment. And often the diagnosis is the most expensive part of the package. So a lot of clients go through that diagnosis, and then when they come to the end of it, the only thing they need is some ear defending headphones so that they can concentrate in a busy office, or permission to work from home on a Friday. And if you think that those, that's really using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So we've got this sort of first path of entry where few people people get through the door of having a diagnosis because it's expensive and it's time consuming. And then once they've had that diagnosis, then they need to then get the technology in place or have some coaching or another assessment to work out what the adjustments are. And then they get the adjustments. And so it's inefficient in terms of money, but it's also inefficient in terms of time, because by the time, from the moment they put their hand up and ask for help to the moment that they get the adjustments they need, can be weeks. And so, in all of that time, you've got managers with a member of the team not performing. You've got an individual who's doing that thing where you're spending all of Sunday worried about Monday. And there's just a lot of stress in the system that doesn't need to be there. So looking at that cost model of the gatekeeping approach, that's what we're trying to flip. And that's what the research, that's one of the things we're doing in the research centre.
Right. And I was part of a webinar. I was watching you a couple of weeks ago, and I really enjoyed the section where you were talking about actually, rather than, for example, asking neurodivergent candidates around their neurodiversity when they enter the organisation, you're actually flipping this and asking, actually, what are the things we need to do as an organisation to enable you to be your most productive self and bring your authentic self to work? So I guess that's a kind of a tangible example of where you're aiming.
Absolutely. If we wait for the diagnosis before we be flexible, then we're limiting our ability to facilitate our employees to work at their best. And actually, that's part of a much bigger movement, not just neurodiversity, bringing your whole self to work, managing performance, creating the optimum conditions for employees to work at their best. And we can make neurodiversity a part of that by learning from our neurodivergent employees and starting to quantify and, as you say, use a data-driven approach. So doing regular reviews and saying, okay, in this period, these are the number of people that needed assistive technology. These are the number of people that needed coaching for things like time management. So actually, is there a systematic way that we could support employees with time management that would mean that we weren't having to send people to individual coaching sessions? And so it's really about proactivity and efficiency, and looking at scalable adjustments that could go in for a whole staff team that would support, that would just happen to support also the neurodivergent thinkers.
Right. And I think we both know across the corporate spectrum, there are varying degrees of maturity in organisations who are pointed in the right direction, but don't necessarily know how to get where they want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
How many, out of interest, how many organisations are doing this really well? If you had to kind of put your finger on a percentage, where do you think the marketplace is now?
I would say 0 organisations are doing this really well. I think there's lots of organisations that are on the precipice of doing this very well. But it's for me, it's about how do we make it scalable and systematic. We need to move away from the gatekeeping approach, as I said, where all the cost happens first and you can't get across the gate till you've had that, expensive assessment, and flip it to adjustments first and expensive interventions last. So we create an adjustments menu. We create what we have to do is look at the whole of the employee life cycle and how we can kind of neurodiversify each stage. So when we look at job design, so even before recruitment, when we look at job design, the jobs that we're designing, are we looking for jacks of all trades? And does that mean that we're limited on people who aren't perhaps all-rounders but have got very specific skills? And that's where the autism hiring movement has really started to make some inroads, and we're evaluating that and we're assessing the impact of that from a research perspective. And then, what other areas are there where specialist skills it might be best to redesign jobs around specialist skills rather than having data analysts assessed on their verbal communication, or graphic designers assessed on their spelling ability. So, we need to kind of get better at that. I think that's, and then each stage of the employee life cycle we go through systematically and take those implicit biases and those hidden barriers out. It's quite a detailed process.
Right. And I think what I love about the power of this research and putting this into the kind of realms of the membership of neurodiversity in business is that we get a lot of feedback from the neurodivergent employees who have an incredible amount of frustration about going through the HR process and feeling quite othered, that they are asking for something that's significantly different. So I think if organisations can actually implement this properly, you're decreasing the stress of those neurodivergent employees and allow them to focus on what they want to do, which is excelling at work.
Absolutely. And in terms of the research progress, so something that we've started to accumulate quite a lot of evidence on now is the success of different individual reasonable adjustments. Okay. So we know, for example, I'm just in the process of publishing a paper at the moment which demonstrates the effectiveness of coaching as a process for individuals, but that has also shown that group coaching is more efficient and more successful than one-to-one coaching. So again, now we come to the systematic part of this. So if for example we've looked at our history and we know that 100 individuals had coaching last year, rather than waiting for individuals to fail, let's put on some memory skills workshops, because group coaching isn't going to be less successful, it's going to be as successful, if not more. And actually then, if it's just called memory skills workshops, you don't have to be stigmatized in order to attend them. Lots of people would come to memory skills workshops. It doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, I am dyslexic or I have ADHD and therefore, it can just be, oh yeah, actually I'd find that really helpful. So we can start building things in, we can neurodiversify our learning and skills so that they include the types of things that neurodivergent thinkers need as standard. And bear in mind, it's not just neurodivergent thinkers. So the kind of people who struggle with memory and concentration are also women in menopause, people with chronic health conditions, in cancer treatment, people who've got young children at home who aren't getting enough sleep. There's lots of reasons why memory skills could be really helpful for people, or time management skills, but we do it in a way that's conducive to a neurodivergent brain. And so, we're accumulating the evidence on those kind of individual and group level effectiveness, and we're starting to really understand what works. And so the next step is to go, right, what happens if we build that in to an organization's general day-to-day HR processes, right, and then we need to evaluate the effectiveness of that. And that's a much harder job from a research perspective. I need organizations that are willing to do it in one site and not in another, for example, for a year, so that we can compare what happens in this site and what happens in that site. And the kind of things we'll be looking for are productivity gains across the whole organization, reduction in turnover, higher reports of employee engagement and employee well-being, and those things we can measure quite easily. And then we can say, does it make a difference? If we build in neurodiverse accommodation as standard options in an organization's culture and human resource process, is it the difference that makes the difference? Can we raise everybody? And interestingly as well, there's some other research from adjacent fields such as race and gender inclusion and disability inclusion more widely, that suggests that when people are really proactive about inclusion, it doesn't just affect the minoritized population, it also affects everybody. So people that are neurotypical, people that are in the majority race for that organization, typically enjoy inclusive processes. It makes them feel more loyal, it makes them feel happy and proud of where they work, it makes them more engaged as well. So it's not about kind of serving a small part of your organization's team because you have to and because it's the law. It's actually about creating a welcoming culture, and that lifts everybody. So that's what I'll be looking for in that research is can we quantify that and report on it, and then use it to encourage other people to go through that process. That's the plan.
Great. Well, it seems like a really exciting time to be leading in that field, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the results of the research as it evolves and matures in the months and years ahead. Will you come back and tell our membership more in a few months and give us more guidance?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And any of the membership that want to work with me on some of those projects in terms of research and submit themselves to the research process and engage in it, I'm absolutely delighted to talk to those members. Great. Let's be at the cutting edge of this together.
Absolutely. Dr. Nancy Doyle, real pleasure to talk with you again today. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing the evolution of your research in the years ahead.